Guild Wars, Sea of Sorrows. Chapter 19. Twilight crept over the harbor, bringing with it the sweet scent of open flame and meals cooking in homes and taverns. The lapping of water against the ships on the docks matched the rhythm of drums and violins in the alehouses, where sailors spent their pay on a night of drinking and debauchery. A light from the windows of the captain's cabin aboard the Nomad shimmered on the waves. Kobaya marched stiffly down the dock toward the clipper. He heard a distant bell ringing the hour in the town and paused at the gangplank to hear it toll. On the deck of the Nomad, the few sailors still on board called out to one another, saying their good nights and walking the rounds before they turned in below. Kobaya twisted the cuffs of his blue frock coat and straightened the collar at his neck. He wished the walk had taken longer. Now that he was here, he had no idea what to say. Taking a deep breath, he considered turning on his heel and going back to the Pride. But even as he tried to convince himself to leave, Kobaya stepped out onto the gangplank, and he found himself striding up the walkway onto the Nomad's deck. "Ahoy!" a voice called from the deck. The soft glow of a lantern moved closer as someone approached the gunwale. "Who goes there?" "Hail, aboard," he answered, waving awkwardly. "I'm here to... is there some problem?" No problem. It's Captain Mariner. I'd like to speak to, Kobaya, as the figure approached. Kobaya caught the shadow of gently fluttering black wraps on the wrist holding the lantern. "Dwayna bless my soul." Recognizing both the voice and the odd bandage-like strips of fabric, Kobaya relaxed. "Virad, good to see you." Lifting the lantern higher, the elementalist pushed back his wire-rimmed glasses and studied Kobaya intently. "You look like a fop," he said bluntly. "Where did you get that terrible coat?" "Matcha gave it to me." "You don't like it?" Kobaya looked down at the frock coat in distress. "I can lie if you want, and say it's very fashionable. I say, on the other hand, will tell you the truth." Probably through a lot of laughter. Grumbling, Kobaya took off the coat and tossed it to hang on one of the dock pegs. He walked up onto the deck and shook Virad's hand. "Thanks." Virad nodded with a sound that was half chuckle and half sigh and gestured for Kobaya to follow. "Lucky for you. Hence, at the tavern with most of the crew, you'd have never gotten aboard." "She's a bit miffed at you. What did you do?" "Me?" Kobaya raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. "I didn't do anything." Virad snorted. When they reached the big oak doors of the captain's cabin, the elementalist stared at him appraisingly and then shrugged and knocked 3 times. "Captain," the elementalist announced with resignation. "You've a visitor." "At this hour?" "Who in the mists?" Kobaya heard the scrape of a chair, followed by the sound of bare feet on deckboards. "I say open the door." She wore her leather pants and white shirt, as she had in the council chambers, but now her hair was unbound, spilling down past her shoulders in dark mahogany waves. I say wrinkled her nose and narrowed her green-gold eyes. "Kobaya, forgot where you docked your ship, did you?" Crossing her arms, she leaned against the arch of the doorway and looked him up and down. "No, Look, Issei." Suddenly awkward, Kobaya glanced over at Virad. The slender elementalist raised an eyebrow, tapping his long, bird-like fingers atop the lantern's hood. "Oh, fine." Virad sighed again and tucked long strands of reddish hair behind his ear. "I'll check on the forecastle. You two behave, or I'll turn into a tornado and hurl you both into the sea." He eyed Kobaya with skepticism and lowered the lantern, muttering as he walked away. Issei was still staring at him, a bemused quirk twisting her full lips. "Well?" she said blankly. "You didn't come all this way just to stare at me, did you?" "No." Kobaya blinked, rubbing his eyes. "Look, Issei, I wanted to talk to you about the council meeting today." "Talk to me?" "Apologize," he added smoothly. "I want to apologize." She stepped to the side and walked back into the cabin, leaving the door open for him to follow. Come in out of the wind. Kabaya Mariner. The main room of the captain's quarters on the Nomad was spacious, not unlike his aboard the Pride, with well-scrubbed floors and shining brass ornaments. But that was where the likeness ended. Kabaya's quarters were rambunctious, filled with the trinkets and trophies of a life-rating ships at sea. Isai's were sparse and businesslike. They were tidy, if lavish, with colored window glass in diamonds of yellow, red, and blue. Light came from covered wall sconces that smelled of burning oil. There was a table with a stack of maps and charts, a desk that had been bolted to the floor, and several chairs shod in heavy lead to keep them standing when the ship tossed on the waves. A tall, 3-part Canthan screen blocked Kabaya's view of the bed, but he caught a glimpse of tightly tucked sheets beneath a scarlet and gold coverlet. A wardrobe stood in the same area, its doors closed and latched to keep its contents safe, even in a storm. Kabaya smiled to see his hat and a book he'd been reading still on her nightstand, right where he'd forgotten them before she left port 3 weeks ago. Isai crossed to the captain's desk and poured 2 glasses of whiskey. She kept one in her hand and set the other on the table with a thump. Choosing the large padded chair near the desk, Aye settled down, pulling her bare feet underneath her legs. She gazed curiously at her visitor. If you're here to start an argument, it's going to be a short one. Isai tapped the side of her glass with her fingers. I'm tired, Kabaya, and I don't have enough whiskey to entertain myself while you rant. I'm not going to rant. I told you I'm here to apologize. He took the whiskey gratefully, turning one of the hard wooden chairs around to straddle the seat. Thanks. All right, then get to it. She eyed him. Kabaya phrased his thoughts carefully. Something about Isai's manner always made him think twice before he acted, something he wasn't at all used to doing. It was uncomfortable, but he liked the results. Simply put, she was good for him. I'm sorry I got angry at you during the council meeting. You had the right to vote your conscience, and I shouldn't act like that's wrong, even when I don't agree with you. He managed a sheepish smile. He went on. Yam was right. I don't take the Pride out as often as I'd like, and maybe that makes me a bad captain. But Yam's a terrible one. He doesn't bring anything to the defense of the city, and despite his platitudes, he's not planning on being helpful. You know as well as I do that he hasn't joined the council to protect Lion's Arch. He joined it to keep his power and his profits intact. Isai nodded. I know. You. Kabaya blinked. That's terrible. Yup. She took a sip of her whiskey. It's damn lousy of him. Yam's a skunk, and there's no doubt about it. He stared at her, restraint forgotten. Then why the hell did you vote for him? Isai set down her whiskey glass and answered, I voted to uphold the rules of the city, Kabaya. I didn't vote for Yam. Are you kidding me? Kabaya exploded. The city's in jeopardy. You know that Asura's trying to rook the council, and you don't feel any kind of responsibility to keep him out? Shaking, Kabaya took a gulp of the whiskey and felt it burn against the back of his throat. Choking slightly, he said, Did they pay you? Isai's eyes flashed, the first sign of genuine anger he'd seen. You think I was bribed? You know me better than that. Then what were you doing? Not that I owe you any kind of explanation, Kobe. But Yam followed the laws. Laws we made and laws we have to obey. If we don't, nobody else will. And then this city really will be everything King Bade says. Chaotic, anarchic, and lawless. Oh, so now it's all about what Bade's going to think of us. Yes. I mean no. Isai thumped her whiskey glass onto the desk. Kriata used to rule Lion's Arch. We're lucky King Bade's got his hands full with the war in Ascalon and the building of his new city, but that won't last forever. If he thinks Lion's Arch is a problem, He'll allocate Sarah from his army to conquer us. Then what do? We don't have the manpower to fight trained military. The only reason we've managed to keep operating independently is because we're not a thorn in the king's side. We're too small to give him reason to take us over, and despite our reputation, Lion's Arch does have laws, and we live by them. I say leaned forward and met his eyes. The minute those two things change, King Bade will take an interest. I assure you. Kobaya took another sip of his whiskey. Fine, he said through gritted teeth. More gently, Issei continued. Laws are important, and we need some new ones. We can't kick Grimjaw off the council for not paying his bills. Or Nodobi for running a slaver. And maybe we should. She pointed at him with the hand that held her glass. If this sets a fire under the council's ass to make those laws, then I'm willing to be the one to do it. And then what? We turn into Kriata? Next, we'll start making laws against Norn in taverns because they brawl too much. Or outlawing Esserin laboratories inside the city limits. The ones that research on Skrit? Yes, Isaiah countered. Those poor little rats. She rolled her glass between her hands in concern. At last, she said, Kobaya. This city needs better morals. And so do you. Kobaya thumped the glass onto the table. I've got plenty of morals. He frowned. No, Kobe. You don't. You've got a conscience, and that's different. Remember the time you sacked that Norn vessel carrying settlers, women and children? South of the Shiver Peaks? Stung. Kobaya raised his voice. I put them all ashore. But you kept their money, Isai replied. And the char freighter carrying Ascalonian relics? I had no idea they were carrying holy artifacts. Even if I had known, how was I to guess that they were a peace gesture bound for Port Noble? You were as surprised as I was to see those statues of Dwayna. It's true, I was. But you sold them to a private collector for quite a bit of money, and that sank any hope of a treaty between Kriata and the Char. Ia scolded. She stood up, pushing her chair aside and moving to sit on the floor of the desk closer to him. In a gentler tone, she continued, You'll do what you want, Kobaya Mariner. Usually, I like that about you, but in this case, it's hurting the city. Kobaya gritted his teeth. You're blaming this whole thing on me? Of course not. But you are the leader of the council, and this is hardly a surprise. Lion's Arch isn't a cluster of buildings and landed ships anymore. It's a town, and someday soon, it's going to be a city. But you're not mad at me over supporting the law. This is a personal issue for you, Kobe, and you know it. Personal? Kobaya leaned forward and placed his hand on her knee. What do you mean? You weren't half this mad before Yum accused you of being a bad captain. A pause. All right. You've got me there, he said grudgingly. With a smile, he added, How about this? I'll grant you that we need better laws. If you admit that Yam's captaincy's bad for Lion's Arch. Granted, Issei replied. She lifted his hand to her lips and kissed it gently. So what are we going to do about it? Grinning, Kobaya held up his empty glass. I like the we part of that question. How about we pour another round of drinks? She laughed and shook her head knowingly. Scamp, emptying her glass in a single swallow, she let go of his hand and walked back to the table. Issei uncorked the crystal bottle and refreshed their glasses. I'm worried, Kobe. It's clear that Yum's not working alone. That bag of money? It wasn't his. He couldn't pay for the cargo I brought out of Rata Sum, so I know he didn't come up with that much cash on the spot. Yam's finances aren't good. He must have had a backer. Interesting. Who? Kobaya took the proffered glass. With a smile, Isaiah sat on the edge of the desk, taking his hand in hers. She smiled contentedly and intertwined their fingers. I don't know. But they already know that you're their enemy, Kobaya. Based on the way you argued against Yum in council, They know you won't let his shenanigans go on without a fight. I swear, if that Asura had had a knife in his hand during the council meeting, you'd be a dead man. If Yam wants a shot at me, he can stand in line. Kobaya winked. They laughed together, voices lifting in camaraderie. A knock on the door drew their attention. Aisei set down her glass and rose, chuckling as she crossed the room. I swear, Kobe, you're incorrigible. According to Sikox, he smiled and leaned back comfortably. I've made a career out of it. Aisei opened the door. The deck outside was empty. Frowning, she glanced in both directions, trying to spot the watch lantern. Virad? After a moment, she called again. Virad? There was no answer. Aisei took a step onto the deck, hair blowing in the sea breeze, and Kobe noticed a small package resting at her feet. What's that? Getting up from the chair, he walked toward her, pointing at the brown wrapped parcel. As Isaye bent to pick it up, Kobaya caught sight of a small figure hurtling down the dock toward the nomad. Multicolored braids bounced wildly in its wake as a familiar voice shouted into the darkness. Colby, get off the ship. That package, it's a... Questioningly, Issei reached for the bundle. Something sparked along the edges of the paper as she did. Before Matcha could finish her sentence, the spark blazed into a flicker of scintillating yellow light. Flame leapt across the surface of the package. In the same instant, Kobaya leapt toward Isaiah. A massive explosion rocked the nomad, roaring over the deck in a wave of hungry flame.